All right, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this session. Karin has been teaching yoga and compassion-based mindfulness for 12 years. She is a yoga teacher trainer, a certified Embodied Yoga Principles teacher trainer, and an assistant trainer on the Embodied Facilitator course, a very, very gifted teacher. She combines her background in community arts and storytelling to offer a range of embodied and creative approaches to support people she works with in their personal and professional development. Karin has been practicing and studying Tibetan Buddhism extensively for 12 years and has a master's in mindfulness studies. And it is my pleasure to hand it over to you, Karin.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's a pleasure to have you as my host, and thank you, Marina. Cora and Richard have just popped up on my screen from Canterbury Yoga, and I am in their wonderful studio, which is my home from home, which they're letting me use today. So check out Canterbury Yoga. We've got lots of stuff online now since COVID. There are some good things about COVID. So I'm also really grateful to the Embodiment Conference for inviting me and all the volunteers. I know how hard they're working because many of them are colleagues that I've been in touch with. If you choose to come into the speakers or panel room, the stage, whatever you want to call it, you won't be videoed. So you can have your video on, you won't be in the conference video package that goes out, if that makes a difference to you. Compassion, the compassionate body, compassion, the topic of my talk is about being together, being connected. So it might help you to embody that if you do choose to come with us. But everything in this session that I offer you is a choice. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, that doesn't feel right. It's physically undemanding, and I will give different options where I can to make it as accessible to everybody as I can. And for that reason, I'd like to start with exploring self-care and setting self-compassionate boundaries for ourselves so that we can be really present for our learning and also ourselves, which can help us gain insights. I think hopefully this session, certainly my intention that this session is a gift to you, to give you something useful for your life outside of the conference. There is a life outside the conference. That's hard for some people to remember right now. And the whole conference, I think, is a compassionate gift to the world, to you and all the beings and Mother Earth that we connect to daily. So as you are here, you may as well be here as fully as you can, and that's also what I want to do. So let's start with an embodied intention to be present, and I will lead a short centering practice. So wherever you're sitting or standing or lying, please put your hand on your belly or your heart or your knees, squeeze your knees. Have a sense of your body and kindly touching your body. So self-compassion is practicing being kind towards ourselves. And if that sounds a bit difficult, like Mark said last night in his keynote speech, try British politeness. Often the way I speak to myself internally is far more rude than I would speak to anyone. So maybe politeness is a way in. So the definition of compassion-based mindfulness is to be aware of the present moment, including ourselves, with kindness. And then take 3 breaths, connecting to yourself and noticing how you are. You might want to close your eyes or look away from the screen as well to do that. Feel your feet on the ground, feel your breath. Sense your body. And then take one more breath in and breathe out with a sound. And perhaps feel yourself relax a little bit. So this is a form of centering to calm ourselves down, also for my benefit at the start of my talk. And then we'll practice some social centering, which I mentioned just before the official start. So it can be very helpful to connect with others. So again, if you want to be in the room with us and connect with more people visually that way, put your electronic hand up. And if you've been looking away from the screen, now inviting you to look at the screen. Perhaps come a little bit closer. You can see my face. Maybe you can see some friendly faces in the gallery view. And have a sense of practicing together. So you might need to imagine that if you're in webinar mode. So imagine all of us around the world, all the countries that were named in the chat. And take that in, so breathing in, taking in everyone's imagined or seen presence. And as we take 3 breaths together, inviting you to take 3 breaths together, taking in this sense of practicing together and appreciating this opportunity. Lovely to see more friends arriving in the room. And then you might like to go into giving yourself a little bit of a hug. And this can be a bit emotive because my session was billed as neutral, but actually compassion is not neutral. Caring about ourselves is not neutral. Caring about others is not neutral. So notice how this feels. This is a posture from EYP called self-care. You can dip your head to one side. That feels okay. You can bring your toes together so your feet are in. You can do this sitting or standing or lying down. Notice how this feels. Does it feel familiar? Or is it something that you know you could do a bit more of? Maybe that's an uncomfortable feeling. Maybe it feels a bit vulnerable, and if it feels too vulnerable, feel free to go back to this way of connecting with yourself. Might be a little more centering, because it's not a vulnerability contest, and I think Mark's already won that one in his Compassionate Inquiry with Gabor Mate. So, taking care of yourself in any way that's right for you during the session. So setting that intention with this posture. And one of the things about EYP is that it's very powerful. So if you're still in the pose, when you let it go, notice if that's a relief. Oh, it was getting quite kind of confronting, this self-care thing. Or is it, oh, I could have stayed there a long time. You might get insights very quickly, and sometimes it's things that suddenly stare us in the face, and it might not be the right moment. So for me, it wouldn't be the right moment to go deeply into my own process right now, for example. So feel free to come out of a pose before I do, and you can always shake it off, which is a great way to shift state, moving. So that's a way to take care of yourself, a practical way to back up that intention. So now I'd like to invite you into this posture. I'm just going to step back a little bit so you can see my feet. You can have your feet a bit wide apart, knees a little bent, and your arms in kind of almost like a hugging gesture. From the side, it looks like this. And this is care posture in EYP, Embodied Yoga Principles. So inside here can be everything we care about for this session. So why do you care about being here? And you don't have to write that in the chat now, you can do that later. Focus on how your body feels, the embodiment of why you care about being here. Why is it important? Why is compassion important to you? So your presence here is kind of boundaried by this care. Inside your arms is what you care about and why you're here. And there might be things you want to keep out for the next another 45 minutes. Like maybe being distracted by stuff that was going on before the session or yesterday. We might have a sense of wanting a boundary around that. We might want a boundary on the notifications on our phone. You could do that very practically. You could turn it off now or put it in another room. So what's outside for the next 45 minutes? And then if there was something that happened, maybe often just before we do something, if you know, in a physical session, if we were all together in a venue, you might have, nearly been run off your bike by a driver on the way here, and you might feel still like a bit fearful about it or angry. So if there's something that's kind of hanging over from the last few hours of your day, or the last few days, you could let it go with a classic yoga pose, forward bend, which in EYP we call letting go pose. So you could bend your knees, you could do this less, you could just breathe out with a big sigh, or you can go halfway down, or you can go all the way down. Letting that stuff go. You might do that for 2 or 3 breaths, imagining you're just giving all that stuff to the earth, or whatever you like, water off a duck's back. That kind of visualization might help, letting it go. And that might help us to be a bit more present for each other and for the session. Another way of being a bit more open and receptive to what I'm offering you might be to turn your palms up, to settle back a little bit in your chair if you're sitting, and to soften your gaze, to kind of let it in for a moment as I give you a bit more of an introduction to Embodied Yoga Principles. A lot of what I'm sharing here is from another of Mark Walsh's brainchildren, Embodied Yoga Principles. And it's basically yoga for what you care about in your life. There are several postures that aren't traditional yoga postures, but that help us to find an archetypal embodiment to make a change in our life off the mat. And so, if you don't know yet, Mark's also the director and the founder of the conference. I work with him a lot. I work with him on the Embodied Facilitator course as well, which is running in 3 different places next year: New York, Berlin, and the UK, COVID permitting. I also drew a lot of inspiration from my compassion-based mindfulness research at the University of Aberdeen and with the Mindfulness Association. And I'm a storyteller, and I'm a British Wheel of Yoga teacher. I train yoga teachers. And a little bit further back, I had a background in theatre and community arts. And increasingly, I try to bring all these things together in my embodiment work. I'm inspired by many of the keynote speakers here these 10 days: Tara Brach, Sharon Salzberg, and Rick Hansen, Dan Siegel, all that stuff I looked at in my mindfulness training. And also a huge influence is my Buddhist teacher, Tsoknyi Rinpoche, who I know has also influenced some of the keynote speakers here. So, after those acknowledgements and thank yous, really, to all my teachers, what is compassion? What is it? The definition is to be able to suffer with, to be with pain, to be with other people or ourselves when we're struggling, to not turn away, to not move to what Tara Brach calls unreal othering, where, oh, that's nothing to do with me, or unreal othering, like I'm noticing myself wearing masks and going shopping, you know, I'm much more kind of slightly aggressive in the supermarket, like, get out of my way, ugh, scary people, you might have COVID, you know, and I'm not seeing people as easily as human beings, as other embodied human beings with lives and families. So it's kind of an antidote to that, to remember that we're all human. So it's a thing that we're often told to do, to be kind in religion or at school, and we're often not told how to, and certainly not necessarily told how to in an embodied way. And that can make us feel kind of even worse, because then we might beat ourselves up about not being kind, or having horrible thoughts about someone that's really irritating us at the moment. But actually that kind of response is just as kind of normal as compassion, because compassion and these threat responses are innate within us, because we're like animals, we're like mammals. We've got the same kind of brains and nervous systems as mammals. What we can do, though, is do something about it. We've got the capacity to soothe our own threat system, to step out of this kind of othering of people and being frightened by someone else's suffering, and to step more closely towards it. And so what we need to do for that is often to calm ourselves down. So we've already done centering, you know, this quick aware of our feet on the ground, a breath in, relaxing a little bit, is a calming centering. And there's many more videos on that, which will be in the conference package. And you can still watch Mark's one for free, which was last night at 6 o'clock. He teaches centering in that. And sometimes we want to be more active. You know, sometimes, calm ourselves down, and then do we want to move towards, say yes, and acceptance. So acceptance is a big part of compassion, being with things as they are, however crappy they might seem. And sometimes it's saying no to some stuff. No, this is really not acceptable. Boundaries. So these are these two polarities I've been posting about on Facebook, the kind one, the yin and yang, the sort of feminine, receptive principle of compassion, receiving you just as you are, or the active, like, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to do something, I'm going to take action to relieve your suffering. And that's more yang, more active, masculine principle, and both men and women can embody both. So that's what I'd like to look at a little bit with you today. It's a very short session, of course, so we can only touch on it a little bit, and I hope you get something useful that you can apply in your life. So a very simple way of kind of starting to enter into it is a little movement that you can do with me. You could do this sitting or standing like I am, or just with your hands, or even just with your eyes and your head. You could look around the room a little bit with a kind of sense of a wave-like motion from side to side. And this is kind of going with the flow, which is a way of accepting things. Well, I'll just go with this. It is how it is. And notice what that embodiment feels like to you in your body when you do that. And if it feels familiar, maybe that's what you're good at. I'm good at this one. I'm really easygoing. I'm a people pleaser. It serves other people well, doesn't always serve me. And the other one is more yang. It's the one I need to practice and have been practicing. It's a way of saying no, basically, being very clear about it. It's this kind of movement, like a sword cutting through the crap. this, not that, this, not that. You can say it out loud if you want, in your own language, and be more powerful. This, not that. And notice what that feels like. What's that like for you? Does that feel familiar? Or unfamiliar? And if it's unfamiliar, again, it could be longed for. Oh, I need a bit of this. Oh, I need a bit of this. Or it's like, oh, this is really uncomfortable. I'm kind of triggered by this. It's too fiery. It feels aggressive. You know? So notice how it feels to you. It might be something that you've been kind of conditioned to not do, or you might have kind of suppressed it because there was too much of it around you when you were growing up, or still, perhaps. So this might also relate to how we respond to stress. So my one is often to avoid, with the flow, flowing nicely away from this problem, thank you very much. Avoidance. Or you might be right, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to fight this. Fight or flight. And of course it's more nuanced than that. But you might also recognise, oh yeah, I'm a bit more that person that would rather not confront the issues, or I'm a person that kind of goes in maybe a little bit aggressively sometimes, maybe a bit too much. So this session might give you some tips on what you could practice to try on a different embodiment. So let's do the yes version, the acceptance version first. And of course you can say no to it. And you can step out of it and you can shake it off and you can move it. So the kind of yes version of compassion might be this kind of archetype of the mother, Mother Mary in Catholicism, Tara in Buddhism, or Kuan Yin, forgiving, soft. You may have someone in your life who is that for you, or recognize yourself in it. And we can embody that with EYP's yes pose. So I'm stepping back a bit so you can see my feet. My feet are near the edges of my yoga mat, and I'm taking one step back, and I'm going to bend my back knee a little bit from the side. It looks like this. And place about 60% of my weight on my back foot. And my shoulders are still above my hips, and I'm not leaning back too far. I'm still feeling pretty balanced. I'm just kind of leaning back a bit to receive. So there's a sense of receiving in it. And then an opening towards. So my arms are going out to the side, my hands are slightly above hip level, palms facing forwards. And then there's a softening here. It might help to place your hand here for a second and kind of stroke or press your breastbone area. You can say ah again, like I just did. Ah. And perhaps imagine, especially if you're on your own and there's nobody other than me on the screen, or maybe I work quite well for you, you can imagine seeing someone in front of you that you'd be really pleased to see. If your doorbell rang now, or there was a knock on the door, you opened the door, and it was your favourite person in the whole world right now. Well, you might go, ah, but first you might take them in. Ah, and then go for the embrace. It's that kind of feeling. So you can do it actually just with your face, your eyes friendly, receiving this imagined or real person that you can see on the screen. Yes, come on in, accepting. You can let that go for a moment. So when we come out of a posture, there's often a moment of insight, like, oh yeah, that's a bit tricky, I couldn't have stayed there too long. Or, oh, that's nice, I want more of that. Hopefully this one felt quite easy. It's actually a form of social centering again, imagining someone you really like or something you really like. Paul Linden, also at the conference, calls it the smiling heart part of centering. So hopefully that one was relatively easy because I invited you to imagine someone you're very fond of, unless you're really missing them at the moment. So it can be this double-edged sword to EYP, just like trauma-aware mindfulness David True even talks about. Sometimes things pop up that we're not really ready for. So let it go if that happens and it's too much. And you could switch your feet, so you've got your other leg back, or sit back in your chair. And you could simply put your arms up if you can't move very well. A sense of resting back in this receptive mode. And I'm inviting you, remember choice, I'm inviting you to bring someone to mind that you feel quite neutral towards, maybe like the people that shop in my local supermarket, that kind of like, well, you're just in my way, I don't acknowledge them, which is worse since I'm wearing a mask and they're wearing masks. Maybe, the Amazon delivery person, they've got terrible working conditions, I'm told, and, it's maybe quite rare that we look them in the eye and thank them and have a sense of, oh, welcome to my door. It might be someone really neutral like that, the bus driver. Imagining being a bit more welcoming to them next time you encounter this person or people. Might be a group, a bit more friendly, yes. Even thinking or saying the word yes can get us into this embodiment. Noticing what it's like to come out. And if it feels a bit fake still, oh, I don't really care about the Amazon guy, that's okay, you can fake it till we make it. That's one of my Buddhist teachers saying, fake it till we make it. And that might come into play when I invite you now to say yes to someone that you find mildly difficult, maybe mildly irritating. A real person in your life, if possible, maybe a colleague that you desk share with, and you're probably not doing that at the moment, but that always leaves a mess. Maybe you're a bit irritated with someone at work or someone at home, mildly, so not too high. It's an online Zoom session, so keep it on a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, how annoyed you are with this person. And see if you can shift your state and say yes to them. Yes. You can imagine them in front of you or with you, in any way that works for you. Feel, sense, or imagine that they're with you. And notice how it is to let that go. And then just like compassion meditation, you could ramp this up to working with someone that you found really annoying. I often find politicians quite useful for that. Again, be kind to yourself. It might help you to use someone that's really had a bad impact in your life, but you might need some extra support with that as well. So take care of yourself. So in the chat, if you'd like to share a little bit about who or what you would like to say yes to more often, because you could also do this with situations, we'd like to hear it. I'd like to read it. And there's usually in EYP a process of inquiry and sharing and witnessing that we do. And so this could be part of that. Is there anything you want to say yes to more often? And also you can put anything else that you noticed in the chat, maybe any little insights that you might be getting, because they're useful for other people to read. And maybe you're also embodied now, you can't be bothered with the computer, which is also fine. Uncanny how you read my mind about the colleague and the politician. Yeah, it's probably because many of us share that. Yeah. Kind of forced together with colleagues, maybe more than we'd like, and politicians as well. I'll try and speak up a bit more. Thank you. So wishing the white supremacist militia could go away. So that's a kind of no as well. I want to say yes to more fun. Great. So let's go into no, what we want to say no to. So, again, some things might pop up as we practice together. As you practice this next posture, I'm inviting you to no posture, or you might bring things deliberately in, like a metta, compassion meditation. So in terms of the embodiment of fierceness, of boundaries, maybe saying no, I've been posting about kind of wrathful images, protecting deities from Buddhism. I don't know if anyone did my Matyute Huki, I just have to look at my notes for his name, Haka practice. I know some friends here did that. And this fierce Maori warrior, and I posted a selfie of my Haka face on the Embodiment Conference Facebook group. It's basically this idea that sometimes to be really clear about what's not acceptable and what we don't want is very, very useful. It can actually avoid violence. I was really struck when Matiu said this. Like, if our Haka, our Maori warrior dance or movement is convincing, just by looking scary, the enemy might go away, and then we don't even have to fight, and nobody has any risk. So this is not necessarily about violence. Paul Linden says it might be. Sometimes you might actually have to do something to protect our family, right? But Paul Linden says power is love. And that the Maori Haka is also comes from a place of love, of protecting the tribe. Power is love, and love without power is ineffective, and power without love, without compassion, could be brutality, it could be brutal. So, bearing that in mind, especially if you find this stuff a bit triggering or seems aggressive to you. So the posture could be as simple as holding your hand up in front of your heart and saying no, no, fingers together. Or you can take the whole pose, which is a similar foot position, quite wide and 1 foot forwards, stable. And then the front knee bending, so we're coming forwards a bit. And my weight is still very centered above my hips, so I'm not kind of going forward too much. And the hand that's coming forwards it's not forcefully extending, it's got a little bend in the elbow. And then this hand is in a gentle fist. It's not like white knuckles. It's gentle, it's a backup. It's like the Maori warriors. If you come any closer, I might do something. But if you respect my boundaries, I can just leave this here. And it's actually a relaxed pose. In your body you can be relaxed and centered. This hand is in front of the heart. You're protecting what you care about, what's important. So it's not there. Because that's like, oh, I'm not really saying no, because I'm right here, you can get to me. It's also not looking away, moving away. No, sorry, no. That's a little bit British as well, apologising when you say no. And the serious face, so we might smile and say no. Well, that isn't as powerful at all. Like if I say no, that doesn't really work. If I say no, it comes across a lot more clearly. Try that on, that embodiment. And see if you can say no. Perhaps in your first language, if that's not English. No. I'm seeing a few hands that are kind of drifting. So if you can see yourself on Zoom, if you're in the room here, you can see, if you can see the center of your chest, then your hand is off. It's not protecting your heart. And facing directly what you want to say no to. And then you can say out loud, because you're all on mute. If you want to say out loud something or someone you want to say no to, you can do that. No to too much Facebook is one line. And notice what it's like to come out of the pose. Is it a relief? Or is there a sense of, oh, this is giving me some kind of useful energy, some of this fierceness feels juicy, like something I could do more of. Or maybe it's that unfamiliar longing or unfamiliar discomfort. And then inviting again, it's just an invitation to repeat it with your other foot forward and to perhaps think of someone or something in your life, that you have difficulty with, that you want to say no to. Habits, addictive behaviors, maybe a person. Would it be helpful to be able to say no to your manager that gives you too much work you keep saying yes to? And notice how this feels when you do no with your body. And notice what it's like to stop and come out of the pose. So if there was also a kind of, oh, this feels a bit uncomfortable, or sometimes in a live workshop together situation, people get quite giggly, and I sometimes get people to stand opposite each other and say no to each other and witness each other, and it can be really quite tricky for some people to not giggle or smile. So if you sense that you really need this, you can practice this with a friend, maybe. You can practice it in the mirror. Maybe find someone that you know has been at the conference that might like to do this with you in person. You could do it on Zoom, one-to-one. I'm sure that would work pretty well. And it's one that maybe is a little bit harder to practice than yes in some ways. We can say yes in lots of small ways. Actually, you can say no in small ways. Just say no to your phone. I've left my phone. Yeah, here's my phone. Like set a timer on your phone when you're on Facebook, 1 minute, and then no. No, I don't really do this, and I have to say no to myself and put it down. So lots of small ways you can practice it. And if you're in a meeting with people, in a real life situation, And you're not going to go into this full pose, probably. You can perhaps make a micro version where you still embody this felt sense of no, this embodiment of no. So you might start here in the full pose. You can do this with me again, or start with the hand, the serious face. And then gradually letting the outer form go, whilst keeping a sense of the embodiment of it. People on the screen still looking, I think they're saying no. Thank you, Hannah, for the time boundary. Good. 10 minutes before we wrap up. So I'd love to see a bit about your nose in the chat. I think there's some new things. Again, maybe you need to shake it off. Let it go. And then have a look. Saying no to your stingy brother. Yes to meeting the moment. No to complaining about the weather. Comfort eating. Self-sabotage. So many things we can do that with. And often when we say no to stuff, it creates space and time to say yes again. So Bridget made me giggle. Yeah, I often find that as well. I get a bit almost embarrassed about it. Definitely something I need to practice. Cool, thank you so much for those. Yes, we can also do in a small way, just by smiling, just by bringing friendliness to our eyes, or maybe turning our palms up. I have had students share, someone's just put no to clutter. I had a student share after doing this in a class that they went home and for the first time in 10 years tidied up their office, and their wife just couldn't believe it. So what's happened to you? I've tried to get you to do this for ever since we got married or whatever. And it was down to yes to tidying up the desk and no to clutter. So try it out and see if it works for you, and maybe share it in the conference. There's going to be another session on saying no with Mark, I think tonight. He's very good at that yang, fierce energy, so you can look that up. So any questions that you have after this little practice? You can, maybe they're already in the Q&A, no questions yet. Oh, that's brilliant. We can go back into self-care pose for a moment, or this centered version of it, if you prefer that. Can ask ourselves, is there anything I need to know for my own self-care in relation to this that I'd like to ask? Anything you're curious about? So this is curiosity pose. I wonder. Are you still evaluating? Embodiment of evaluation. What's this EYP all about? I don't know. It's just another form of learning, discerning. Need to learn to say yes to my own imperfections. Yeah, so that could be self-care as well, with yes. Lovely. And then we can just take a moment reflecting if there's no questions, like how these postures might really be helpful to ourselves in our life and also to the things that we're in service to. So going back to the things we care about. What will be inside your circle of what you care about, and how could saying yes and no help you there? One way that's come up in relationships that many students and myself have shared, and EYP teachers, is that if we don't have a clear no, then our loved ones and our colleagues also find it harder to know when we mean it when we say yes. You know, if we're people pleasers, always saying yes, then that yes becomes very watered down. So a good balance between yes and no could be really helpful for relationships. Do any of the postures link to yoga mudras, hand gestures? The question box is not working. Oh, it's not working if you're in the panel, actually. I experienced that the other day. So you could unmute yourself if you're in the room with me and ask a question. I think that there's definitely lots of ways we use our hands in EYP. This is often a kind of hand forward or hand there is a blessing posture, I think, in yoga and Buddhist traditions, but it can also be a warding off. We don't really do all the little detailed mudras that we have in yoga, but certainly they change my embodiment on a very subtle level. So you could play with those things in your practice or your meditation. Having your palms up or down can make a difference. Where your gaze goes, how you're breathing. So there's breath is more kind of a yes. And then if we breathed in, like in this haka we were doing, ha! That kind of breath is much more fierce. So we can change our state just using our breath or our gaze. Like we could really strongly look at something. You can do that now. Just a point in the room or on the screen. I'm looking really strongly at the camera. Or we can go into peripheral vision and soften and take in the whole space, which is much more unboundaried, more open. So it goes from like the really obvious to the very, very subtle. Yeah, Embodied Yoga Principles. EmbodiedYogaPrinciples.com is our main website for this. And I've also got stuff on coming up in my classes. I use it a lot. I do a lot of teaching on Zoom. I've got a couple of courses coming up. One online course in January called the Compassionate Warrior, which is a course for women to be able to embody that fierceness that many of us have problems with being able to express. So I'm still wondering why the yes posture didn't feel as natural to me as the no posture, somebody put. And that's usually down to habitual patterns. So what we've been practicing all our life. So a lot of the time as children, and I think more so women of my generation and older, we were told to be nice girls, you know, to be nice and quiet, maybe, you know, not argue, things like that. So we're conditioned, many of us, to say yes, to be kind of pleasing, to cooperate. And in certainly my culture, Dutch culture, that was the case. And more so for women than men. So there's so many aspects to why we are the way we are. All these layers of embodiment, from culture to gender to our biology to everything that's happened to us in our lives and the practices we've done. You know, if you've done martial arts, you might be much better at saying no and doing that pose. If you've done lots of like improv dance or solo practices like yoga and tuning into yourself, you know, you might be better at saying yes and accepting. So it's what you practice and what your whole background is. And often it's not even that important to work out why. It's like, oh, I don't know why, but I can see it'd be useful to have a clearer no and to be comfortable saying no. So I'm going to practice it and think of the situations in your life where that could work. So maybe take away from the session one thing where you could use yes and one thing where you could use no, and practice it to be in service to yourself and be in service to others. And set an intention to practice it. And if you decide to practice it, it's recommended to do like 1 minute a day for a few months, even if it's really uncomfortable, to hold it, to bring it into different situations, to try the subtle, the micro version that you could do without anybody really realizing that you were practicing EYP. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. And thank you all so much for joining me and being here today with me live from Canterbury Yoga. And is there any stuff that the tech hosts need to say or share?
Yes, thank you so much, Karin. That was beautiful practice. And everyone, feel free to continue to post in the chat what you are taking away from this experience, maybe your intention to practice after this. We will be taking an hour break now. So please do take care of yourself during this break, whether that means time away from the screen or connecting with one another through one of our coffee breaks, through the Facebook page. Yes, please do take care of yourself. When we come back from our hour break, we'll have Pamela Stokes-Eagleston and Amina Naru offering a session on exploring self-care through yoga. Again, this session will be recorded and available to watch for 48 hours, but you can purchase it as part of the recording package. And I do highly encourage you to consider purchasing one of the packages. It's a nice way to digest all of this embodied knowledge at your own pace. It's a nice thank you to the staff behind the conference as well. And we'll be posting some links right now in the chat of how you can connect with Karin, how you can continue to work with her, study with her, connecting with Embodied Yoga Principles. So please do follow those links and connect with Karin. And I'll turn it back to you. I would love for you to share, please, your top tip for being more embodied, Karin.
Yeah, my top tip for being more embodied relates to my session, but it's also true for me. Figure out what you need to practice in terms of embodiment to be more compassionate to yourself, because that is the foundation for being more compassionate to others. That's my top tip.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here, for sharing your insights with one another. Yeah, thank you. And thank you again, Karin, it was great.
Thank you, Hannah. Lovely to see you. Hannah's also a great EYP teacher. Do you do stuff online? Just giving you a little plug.
Yes, I do offer online courses and classes, and I'll be offering something later in the week on Friday. Yeah.
All right. As well.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody. Bye.